This is a joint work with Nicolas de Saxe. So the setting is so it's a colloquium talk. So I will recall backgrounds, and G is a compact group. And you can think, for example, that G is the orthogonal group over the real. And on this group, I have a probability measure. And it's good to have in mind the example mu is just the average of 2 Dirac mass at 2 points A and B. And what we want to do is study the convolution, iterated convolution of mu. So mu convolution n times is just this convolution, which means that if I compute it on continuous function on G, I can write this way: mu convolution n times applied to phi for the integral of phi with respect to this measure. And by definition of the convolution, it's just the integral over g n times of this function computed at the product g1 gn, where g1 gn are integrated with respect to the measure mu. So this formula tells you that this probability measure is the law of this product when you choose the GI according to this law mu and independently of one another. And in this example, it's so nice to have this in mind. Mu convolution n times is just 1 over 2 to the n, and 2 to the n is a number of words of length n in A and B. So you just compute the sum for over all the words W in A and B of length n. And you are averaging the Dirac mass at all the words of length n, so you have 2 to the n words. And so you want to understand how these words become equidistributed on G. So this is this first equidistribution part. The M, which is what is the behavior of this probability measure on G. So we want to know whether they become equidistributed on G with respect to the R measure. So for that you have to say that mu is not supported by a smaller subgroup. So this is the definition, which tells you that mu is adapted if for every h included in G, which is a proper closed subgroup it does not have a full mass. So this probability measure is not supported on smaller subgroup because it will prevent become equidistributed. A second condition that you need is that which is called aperiodic. If moreover you assume this condition and you assume also when for the subgroups which are normal you ask that not only H does not have full measure but the translate of H does not have full measure. Okay, and then there is this fact from the 40s which is due to Ito and Kawada, and which says that if mu is aperiodic, then mu convolution n times converge to lambda g, which is the R probability. The unique G invariant probability on my compact group G. And this means, I write it precisely what it means. Each time I take a continuous function of G, then the limit for n infinity of mu convolution n times applied to phi. So this integral converge towards the average of phi with respect to the R probability. So it's very classical result, and I wanted to give to recall the proof of this result. So the proof, it's enough to check this for a dense set of function. And I wanted to begin by a very easy case. When G is the group SO2, which is isomorphic to the real modulo the integer. And in this case, you can use as a dense set of functions the trigonometric polynomials. So you can assume phi is equal to phi m, and phi m is the function which sends the theta real modulo 1 to e to the 2 pi I n theta, because they span a dense subspace. And and then it's easy for this function, because if you compute mu of phi m, which is just the average of this function, 2 pi I m theta for the measure mu, This is just the Fourier coefficient. Sorry, Cm of mu. This is just the Fourier coefficient of mu. And what you want to study is you want to see that this is going to 0 when I evaluate mu convolution n time to this function. You want to see that this goes to lambda g applied to phi m, so to 1 when m is 0. M is an integer, and to 0 when m is not 0. So, but the Fourier coefficient of the n-time convolution is nth power. And this goes to 0 for n infinity when m is not 0. Because this coefficient has modulus strictly smaller than 1. So you are averaging complex number of modulus 1, and the average has to be strictly smaller than 1, except if what you are averaging are all proportional. But if all those are proportional, mu almost surely, this means that the support of mu is included in a translate of a subgroup, and this is not possible because mu is aperiodic. So this is the easy case, and now I want to deal with the general case. I'm sure everybody knows that, but I'm going slowly. And the general case is G is a general compact group, and then you just replace the Fourier analysis by the decomposition of G by Peter-Weyl theorem. So as a dense set of functions, you will choose coefficient of unitary irreducible representation. So I can assume that this function phi of G is the coefficient pi of G VW, where pi is a irreducible unitary representation. Sorry?
Your compact simple Lie group. Is it
no, G is a compact group.
It's not a Lie group, then it's a bit more than Peter-Weyl, isn't it? So can it be p-adic?
Yeah.
Is it still the result of Peter-Weyl?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yes. So irreducible unitary representation. And this is very general. What gives you the fact that it is a simple Lie group is that you can parameterize the representation by highest weight and so on, but this is very general fact. and VW are just let's say a unit vector in this representation. So then you set you define pi of mu as just the average. So this will replace the Fourier coefficient, the average over G of pi of G d mu of G. So this is an endomorphism of this. Since G is a compact group, all the irreducible unitary representation are finite dimensional. So it's an endomorphism of this finite dimensional complex vector space. And what is nice with this definition is that you also have this kind of property. If you compute pi of mu convolution n times, it's just the nth power of pi of mu. And if I'm computing my mu convolution n times applied to my function phi, this one, then it is just the scalar product of pi of mu to the n v w. And I have to check that this goes to 0 for n infinity when pi is different of 1. When pi is not the trivial representation. And why is it the case? It's just because the spectral radius of pi of mu is smaller than 1. And why is the spectral radius of this operator pi of mu smaller than 1? Indeed, if it's equal to 1, then you have the spectral radius is the supremum of the modulus of the eigenvalue. So if this is the case, there exists a vector which is an eigenvector for pi of mu. So you have alpha, this eigenvalue of modulus 1, and the corresponding eigenvector will be v. And but this condition tells you that the line generated by v is invariant by the support of mu, and then by the group spanned by the support. So since it is adapted, the line CV is G invariant, but it's an irreducible representation. So this means my representation is one-dimensional, and then I finish like in the first case. Pi is a character, and you end like in the easy case. Okay, so this is the classical result during World War II. And now I want to speak to spectral gap, to speak of spectral gap. And now the question is there a speed? A speed of equidistribution, it is a speed c in this convergence, in this limit going there. So maybe not for all functions, but maybe for a sufficiently regular function. So maybe, for instance, the function just for this function. And then it will imply it for every sufficiently regular function. So let's say for phi equal pi VW. So this means that okay, this speed, I mean this means that for instance for this function I want that when I compute mu convolution n time of phi minus the expected limit, which is 0 except if pi is trivial, I want this to be bounded by a constant which depends on phi, and then E and something decaying exponentially. So I want an exponential speed of convergence towards the limit. So one can reformulate this question. For that you introduce the Hilbert space of L2 function with respect to the R measure with zero average, and the operator you have an analog of the operator pi of mu. I will call it T mu. On this Hilbert space, defined by a T mu of a function is just the average of the translate of this function. If I compute it at a point G, it's just the average of the translate of this function with respect. The average is with respect to this probability measure mu. Okay, and then spectral gaps mean that the norm of this operator is strictly smaller than 1, and this implies this is equivalent to the exponential decay. The definition mu as a spectral gap if this operator has norm smaller than 1 equivalently, as we have seen in the proof, this means that the sup over all irreducible representations which are not the trivial one of the norm of pi of mu is bounded by 1. So I have proven in this in the proof, we see that each of those norms are smaller than 1, but I want a control which is uniform in the irreducible representation. This is the meaning of the spectral gap. So the question is whether aperiodicity implies spectral gap. So you cannot expect that.
I thought you've only shown that the spectral radius.
Sorry?
Is smaller. I thought you've only shown that the spectral radius is smaller than 1, not that the norm is smaller than 1.
Spectral radius smaller than 1, okay. So if you assume mu to be symmetric, spectral radius is equal to the norm, and at least this condition, for sure, this condition definitely implies this decay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you want to have a uniform
Sorry?
you want to have an upper bound which is less than 1.
Yes. The sup is less than 1, yes? So let me give you an example. G is SO2, and mu is just 1/2 the Dirac mass at so it's R over Z like before, and the Dirac mass at theta 0 and minus theta 0. I'm averaging these Dirac masses, and I assume, say, that theta 0 is not rational. So this tells you that this probability measure is aperiodic, but you don't have, it does not have spectral gap. Because you compute the Fourier coefficient. These are the Fourier coefficient of mu. And so what I call the Cm of mu. I wanted to, I have to control the sup for m non-zero of the Fourier coefficient of mu. And it's very easy to compute because it is just cosinus m times theta 0. So maybe there is 2 pi. And each of them is smaller than 1, but the sup is equal to 1. So you don't have this spectral gap. So from now on, G is a compact simple Lie group. This excludes SO2, but this does not exclude SO3. And there is this conjecture, which is due to Sarnak, which tells you that if mu is adapted, since you are simple, this aperiodicity condition disappear because you have no normal subgroup. So mu is adapted implies mu has spectral gap. And it's open for SO3. So even in the first case, one does not know the answer to this question. And what we did with Nicolas, was to look at the theorem of Bourgain and Gambourt. Who proved this implication for the unitary group under some assumption of mu that the mu is supported by algebraic elements. And they proved it for the unitary group, and we adapted their method to any simple compact Lie group. So the statement is that if mu is adapted and mu give full mass to what I will call GQ bar, then mu has spectral gap. Okay, so and I want to explain the idea of the proof, but I have to say what GQ bar is. You fix the basis of the Lie algebra G of your group G, and GQ bar is just the set of elements of G such that the adjoint of G, which are matrices in this basis, have a coefficient. The coefficient of these matrices in the algebraic closure of Q. Okay.
Sorry, what is the group now?
Sorry?
What is the group now?
G, from now on, G is any compact simple Lie group.
What is GQ bar?
GQ bar is defined here.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Now, I make some remark. So GQ bar is a countable set.
The basis has to be the one.
Sorry?
The basis must be the Y basis, right?
In fact, we don't use that in our proof, so you can take any basis, but I think it's better to take this one. But in the proof, it happens that we don't use it.
Can I ask something silly? I mean, this definition GQ bar depends on the choice of basis, yeah?
Yes. It
Pretty
depends.
strong,
Yeah,
yeah.
it depends. Yeah. But it's
So
okay.
your theorem says if you could find any basis,
Yeah, but
course.
yeah. But it's just because in the proof we don't use that, but I don't think it's very important. And so maybe I have few remarks just to help understand what happens. First, that if mu is just an average of two probability measures, mu1 and mu2, and mu1 has spectral gap, then mu has spectral gap. At the complexified version of
G? Because I mean, so G is our points of an algebraic group usually, right? So then,
yes. You want me to because I didn't insist on being R.
Yeah.
GQ bar is not included in G. What you are saying?
yeah, I mean,
Like-
this way it is included.
In
but-
this way it is. So take this as just as a definition, and yeah. But very soon I will replace G by look at the complexified algebra. And, yeah, sure. But at least it makes sense that way. So what you say is I can put R here, and it will be the same. And so what this says, it says that if a piece of mu has a spectral gap, then mu will have a spectral gap. So so if just a piece of mu satisfies this condition, so if just a mu of G of Q bar is strictly positive, then you will have a spectral gap also because of that. And the second thing is that mu has spectral gap if and only if mu convolution n times has spectral gap. This is and this will be if and only if. So two conditions which are useful is to notice also it's the same as if you look at the convolution of mu with mu change as a spectral gap. Where mu change is the image of mu by the map G give G minus 1. So because of that,
you're not assuming mu is symmetric here.
no, but just I'm just saying that now we can assume, because of this remark, you can assume.
Wait, but if you're not assuming symmetric, then why does mu n having a spectral gap imply that mu has a spectral gap? Unless you mean, well, based on what you've written as the definition of spectral gap here.
I understand. I understand your question, but I don't know how to answer to it. Okay, maybe. Yeah.
Okay.
So what I mean, I can assume that
in any
This
case,
is a following of your previous question because I wrote norm and you wanted me to write spectral radius. So maybe I should have written spectral radius and everybody would be happy. But in fact, I don't think it's very important. You can deal
Okay.
with the norm.
The logical chain is if you write it for spectral radius, then you have this equivalence, then you can only consider symmetric guys, and then what you wrote is true. I mean, that's kind of.
I think it's what I wrote is true, but
in any
okay.
case, you prove
So
that
at least I can assume mu is a symmetric because of that, and also mu and the and mu equal mu change. Mu is, sorry, and the support of mu is finite. Okay, so. So I want to split this theorem in 3 parts. So now I assume that.
so you said you can assume that support is finite, or you are assuming that support is finite?
I can assume because the support of mu is mu is supported by a countable set. So I can split into and now I want to speak of Diophantine. A probability. So you see, to prove that mu has this equidistribution property, we needed that mu give no mass to subgroups. So Diophantine probability will be an improvement which helps to prove spectral gap. So the improvement is the following. We say that mu has this Diophantine property if you can find 2 constants, one big, one small, such that for n large, each time you have a proper subgroup of G, then so I will not only ask that mu gives small mass to H, but if I compute sorry, if I compute the mass of a small neighborhood which is decreasing with n, so E minus Cn of H, this will be smaller than E minus Cn, where H rho is just the row neighborhood of my subgroup.
D is some invariant distance on G.
And D is in G invariant distance on G. Riemannian. Thank you. Maybe I keep this. Okay, so sorry, I knew something was wrong. I'm computing with mu convolution n times, sorry. Okay. And so now the three steps are the following. The first step tells you that this condition is exactly spectral gap. So mu is Diophantine. Implies, and in fact it's equivalent to mu as spectral gap. So this is the main part of the, and then we have to check this Diophantine property. And so it will be in two steps. The first step does not use the algebraic condition. It tells you that if mu is adapted, then you are able to find the constant small c such that for n large, if for any proper closed subgroup, if you compute not mu convolution n of the neighborhood but just of the subgroup, then it decays exponentially. And I think this theorem, so I learned this morning that this theorem is in fact already due to Saleh, Golsefidi and Varjou. And then the last statement. So I want to say that when mu is algebraic, then mu is Diophantine. So I have to say something about the mass of this shrinking neighborhood of the proper subgroup. And so since mu has finite support S, so it will be a statement about a subset, a finite subset in GQ bar. And then I am able to find some big constant C, the one which is here, such that for n large, if in the Sn, which is the support of mu convolution n times, so the product of n element of S, if I look at all these products which happens to be in the neighborhood, in this shrinking neighborhood of my subgroup, so for every H proper subgroup of G, I will be able to find another proper subgroup of G which contains this intersection. Okay, so this is the way everything is split. And maybe I'd like to discuss theorem A, ideas which are related to theorem A. So this is, I forgot the number, this flattening. So a key step to prove theorem A is flattening lemma. So this is an idea introduced by Bourgain. So as I said, we follow the strategy of Bourgain and Gamburt. And so the question is, how can I know, how do I recognize that a measure mu is near the R measure? So one way is to look at the Fourier coefficient on the dual space, and the Fourier coefficient has to be small, say. But one want a way on the side of the group, not going to Fourier analysis. And so for that you introduce for delta positive, you will average your probability measure. So you introduce this probability measure, which is just the renormalized R measure on a ball of centers the identity of the group and radius delta. So it's 1, so this is characteristic function, 1 over lambda g of this ball of radius delta. So this is a L1 function of norm 1. And you can consider also a mu delta, which is the regularized of mu by p delta, just mu convolution p delta, and again this function mu delta is the L1 function of norm 1, and but we may look at the L2 norm of mu delta. So if mu, for instance, is the R measure on a subgroup H, you can compute the L2 norm of mu delta. For instance, if you start with the Dirac mass, compute the L2 norm here. So the L2 norm, you have to compute the integral of the square of that. So there is, this does not change, but this becomes to the square. So this go outside. And so it's given by 1 over the measure of a ball of radius delta. And you have a square root after that. So it's delta to the power minus half the dimension of G, when H is a trivial group, and in general is the dimension of G over H, which occur here. So this means that when mu is very irregular, the growth of this when delta goes to 0 is like minus delta to the minus 1/2 dimension of G, and the more regular mu is, the smaller this function is. So you want to have this function to be small. So this is a strategy. And the flattening lemma of that you need is that if this does not, if this is not small enough, maybe when you replace mu by mu convolution mu, it will become smaller. This is what a statement, maybe. What I will say precisely what I mean by you improve. So for every, so it's a bit kind of technical, but so if you are not too small, given by some alpha, you will improve by some epsilon. The smallness of this function. So such that for delta small enough, and each time I have a symmetric probability measure. Such that on one hand this L2 norm is not small enough, and on the other hand you have a statement which tells you, so it's a technical assumption which tells you that mu does not give big mass to a small neighborhood of subgroups. So I write it. It tells you that you have to work not only at scale delta but at all the scale bigger than delta. For every row bigger than delta, if you compute, so it will not be mu, it will be mu convolution mu of some neighborhood. So for every H closed proper subgroup of G, if you compute the row neighborhood, the measure of a row neighborhood of H, then it will not be that big. So you don't want mu to be concentrated on subgroups. And technically, it's something like delta minus epsilon rho, rho to the alpha. So such some control that the mass is not concentrated on H, and then you get that the way this function increase for mu convolution with mu is better than the way it increased. So it's the L2 norm, and this is the L2 norm for mu. So if it is not good enough, you can increase it by going to mu convolution mu. This is exactly what this statement says. And then this way you are able to, replacing mu by some convolution, you are able to assume that mu mu delta its L2 norm is bounded by delta to the minus epsilon 0. So you are able to go up to that. And then just say one word. So the end of the proof is very similar to so the end of the proof you use the Fourier analysis and that I explained for general group, but you you take advantage of the fact that since you know the representation theory, the representation which occur in L2 of G occur with big multiplicity. This is what you use. So, but maybe I stop here. So, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Any question? Where does the multiplicity help you?
How does multiplicity is used? That's your question. And so the idea is so it's not really mu that you get here. It's for after replacing mu by a convolution power that the regularization is bounded by delta minus epsilon 0. So, but you can compute this L2 norm of mu convolution delta, because it's an element of L2 of G. So you can write it by decomposing L2 of G in irreducible representation. So you have a sum. So I parameterize by the highest weight. Lambda is the highest weight of the representation. So it occurs here the dimension of V lambda, which is a multiplicity which the representation parameterized by lambda occur. And then you have the way. This is just a convolution of mu convolution n times and this p delta. So what you get here is pi lambda of mu to the n times pi lambda of p delta to the square. So this is an equality. So you have maybe it's a Hilbert-Schmidt norm. And what you do, so you want to prove that for every lambda, this is smaller than 1, strictly smaller than 1. That's what you want to do. You want to prove spectral gap. You want it independently of lambda. You want a born independent of lambda. That's what you are looking for. And what you do is okay, just 1 minute to answer. What you get when iterating this lemma A is something like you have such a bound for some delta n which decays, which is of the form e to the minus c0n, which decays exponentially. So out of this step, you get this kind of estimate. And then you write this equality with delta is equal to delta n, and you just, in this sum, you just keep one lambda. So this is your lambda. And you adapt, you have to adapt lambda and delta n. Take delta and delta n, and you adapt, you fix lambda. Lambda will be large, and you want to have this bound, and you adapt n such that the norm of lambda such that delta n maybe is of something like maybe 1/2 the inverse of the norm of lambda, meaning like you see what you want to do is you want to see that this is the p lambda of delta is not important. So your representation, it's like when you have Fourier coefficient. You look at cosinus m theta. If m is large, if you take theta sufficiently small, depending on m, then you will be near 1, bigger than 1/2. So this is exactly what I'm doing. So when I'm doing that, I know that this p lambda of p delta is very near, or maybe not so far from identity, maybe 1/2, something like that. I'm not very precise on the constant, but this means that what I have is here an upper bound on that, and I want to deduce an upper bound on one of these terms. So I replace the sum by one term, but where I take advantage is that I know that the dimension of the representation with highest weight lambda is bigger than the norm of lambda. And the norm of lambda here is, let's say, equal to 1/2 delta n minus 1. So now I plug this in here, and I get that delta n to the minus epsilon 0, which is e to the c0n, and there is some epsilon 0, will be bigger than this dimension of v lambda, which is e to the c0n, okay. So as I told you, p lambda of p delta, I can remove it. And then there is, maybe there is also the 1/2, which is over, maybe 1/4, which remains. And then there is p lambda of mu norm to the n. And then this tells you that p lambda of mu is bounded by maybe 4 to the power 1/n. And then there is a constant here, which is e to the minus c0 times 1 minus epsilon 0. But this is smaller than 1 when n is large enough. So then you have this, which is uniform in lambda. And so the main point here was in this discussion was to have this nice minus c0, which comes from here, to have so. Why is it smaller than 1? Because of the e minus c0, and it was competing with that. But this is, what is this? This is come from here, and this comes from the multiplicity. So this is where the multiplicity helps you to win. Yes?
I assume you can you can prove it for semi-simple groups, right?
Yes.
Okay, so any other questions? Okay, so then let's thank Julia.